welcome back to The Independent Pianist. I'm your host, Cole Anderson, as usual. And I got a request ages and ages ago from a viewer to look at some of these Bach-Busoni transcriptions. So I'm finally starting to do that today. And I'm going to dive in with the second from his collection of 10 chorale preludes. These are pieces that Busoni transcribed, in his own words, in a chamber style. This is in contrast to his more brilliant transcriptions, concert transcriptions, of various of the organ toccatas and preludes and fugues for organ. It's always been somewhat mystifying to me how much of a bad reputation Busoni's Bach transcriptions have gotten. This started really in the mid-20th century. I know Schnabel made some kind of dismissive comments about various of these transcriptions as being just kind of noisy. And also a musician like Glenn Gould lumped Busoni's transcriptions in with Tausig's as pieces that corrupted Bach's originals. This always seemed very unfair to me. I looked at these transcriptions very closely in comparison to the originals, and I was always really impressed about how faithfully they actually transfer the effects of the original organ pieces to the piano. Busoni was much more conscientious than someone like Tausig or someone else like Stokowski, perhaps, in the way that he realized these pieces. He was really trying to actually be quite faithful to the original. Granted, he does sometimes take liberties or include embellishments. He treats the original with a little bit of freedom. So it's definitely good to look at the originals if you're going to play these transcriptions. But all of the liberties that he does take are generally within the bounds of what would really have been allowable for a performer in Bach's day. Another reason why he does this, I think, is because he viewed these perhaps with a kind of pedagogical intent as well. So he wants to demonstrate how you realize ornaments, how you might expand a work if you're performing it on a different instrument than it was originally written for, and so forth. And really, as far as the art of transcription goes, these organ transcriptions are simply astounding. The kind of technical wizardry that they exhibit is really amazing. It's a masterclass in how to transcribe something for the piano. And really, I can't think of anyone else who was so successful in transcribing organ works in particular. Even Liszt, who did a series of Bach organ works in transcriptions for solo piano, even Liszt kind of falls short of the resourcefulness that Busoni exhibits in these transcriptions. When you consider that the organist has 2 feet on a pedal board, as well as 2 hands on many different manuals to create the sound, and all the different stops which provide doublings at different octaves and so forth, it's really quite a feat to bring that together for 2 hands on a piano, and Busoni does it very, very successfully. At one and the same time, he brings out wonderful qualities of piano sound, but he also evokes qualities of the organ original as well. So he makes these pieces native for the piano while still bringing some of the feeling of what the organ sound gives these pieces. Now, of course, these transcriptions are not going to replace the original. As you might say, why bother? Why not just leave them for the organists? And of course you could. From my perspective, these transcriptions just reveal new aspects of the qualities of these pieces. It's a really special experience. It gives a different emotional tint to them when you hear them on piano. And generally, when Bach wrote a piece of music, there was a certain amount of flexibility in instrument. Many of his works were written to be played on practically any keyboard instrument. So even his organ works are actually quite malleable. And the piano is a particularly flexible instrument when it comes to realizing music originally written for other timbres. The piano does have a kind of neutrality in its tone, which is very well suited for that. This particular chorale prelude actually didn't begin life on the organ. It was the 4th movement from a cantata, actually quite a famous one, BWV 140. I won't try to do the German here, because I know my pronunciation won't be that good. But at any rate, that movement was at the heart of the cantata. It was the middle movement, and it was actually set in a manner which is very reminiscent of a chorale prelude. The actual form is usually referred to as a chorale fantasia, in which the Lutheran hymn tune, which is the basis for the entire cantata, appears almost unchanged in one voice, and then Bach provides counter melodies. In this case, it's just a bass line and a counter melody in the strings to counterpoint that hymn and to provide preludes, interludes, and coda. So this is a technique which actually goes way back to the beginnings of counterpoint called cantus firmus, where there is a cantus firmus, underlying melody, which forms the basis for free counterpoint. Just as an aside, too, I would just recommend, if you don't know Bach's cantatas, I'd recommend going and taking a listen to some of them. This is a great one to start with. It's a really brilliant idea. It all starts with one of the Lutheran hymns, whatever was central for that particular day in the church calendar, and Bach basically composes the entire cantata out to kind of allow the listener to contemplate the text and the music of the original hymn. There will be movements that don't feature the hymn, but peppered throughout the cantata, there'll be movements that have this kind of free setting of the hymn, and he'll usually end the entire cantata with a straightforward harmonization of the original hymn, so you can really just hear it in its basic form. And actually, these harmonizations are very highly respected among music theorists and musicians in general. They're oftentimes extraordinarily beautiful, and they just show perfectly how to harmonize a melody in 4 parts. So here's Bach's harmonization for this particular hymn tune. So this movement uses that hymn tune in the tenor voice, but the strings provide a counter melody in the soprano, as I was saying, and the bass line is given by the continuo. So Bach ended up transcribing this for organ solo much later in his life. It was published in 1747, so right before he died, actually. And that was part of a collection known as the Schubler Chorales. It was actually pretty rare for him to actually publish, go through all the trouble of trying to actually publish something. So this was a real statement for him. All but one of these arrangements can be traced as transcriptions, note for note, of movements from one of his cantatas. So this was probably Bach's way of getting some of the music for his cantatas, all of which were unpublished during his lifetime, out into the public eye, so that they, making a statement about this music. Usually nowadays his cantatas are considered to be among Bach's greatest works, but at the time they were practically unknown outside of his own circle. So the arrangement for organ is very much the same as in the original. The right hand takes the string counter melody, the left hand plays the hymn tune, and the organist's feet cover the bass line on the pedal board. And actually, this was supposed to set a hymn tune, that would have been very well known at the time, but the counter melody in the strings nowadays is probably more famous. It's very, very beautiful, very graceful, pastoral kind of tune. So here it is. This is the opening with just the counter melody, providing a kind of prelude. This is how Busoni transcribes it for the piano. So that's how the form begins. We get this neatly closed off opening section with the new counter melody. Then as the counter melody repeats, we get the entrance of the hymn tune in the tenor voice. So as the movement progresses, we get the feeling that we are circling back to the countermelody again and again. Elements of the countermelody repeat as a means of structural cohesion. For that reason, I referred to the countermelody as a ritornello. Ritornello is actually a term that applies to instrumental music. Vivaldi's concertos, for example, use ritornello form. It's just a melodic idea that keeps coming back repeatedly in contrast to other episodes in the course of a piece. Bach is actually varying this countermelody. He changes the order of the various elements, he shortens parts, he extends other parts. He also includes a prominent modulation to C minor to fit into the harmonic scheme of the hymn. So all that is remarkable compositionally, and it's really matched by the skill that Busoni shows in the transcription. He finds all kinds of elegant ways in which to fit the hymn tune into the texture, and it's really extraordinary. If you're only hearing it without seeing that only one person is playing, you might get the impression that someone's helping out, reaching over the pianist to play the hymn tune. It really does sound like three hands in many places. So the pianist has to share the hymn between their right and left hands while also handling the bass line and the countermelody. So I just take a few highlights of solutions that Busoni discovered to fit all of the music into the span of two hands in particularly difficult spots. So right here, this is a problem that can kind of seem insurmountable at first. The bass, which is doubled in octaves, Bach asks for that in the original organ score, but the bass is going down to a low G, and the tenor melody also is on an E flat below middle C, so that's already a wide stretch, but the ritornello is just about to start again on a B flat above middle C. So we have a huge range here to cover with just two hands on the piano. So one solution, of course, is to drop the lower notes of the bass line so that the left hand can play the bass line and the countermelody. But Busoni doesn't want that to be too obvious that he's dropping that. He wants to keep the sound as consistent as possible. So his solution is wonderful. The left hand plays the first lower bass note here, the B flat, then crosses the right hand to play the first two notes of the ritornello, while the right hand continues with the bass line and the hymn melody. So we have to lose two notes of the bass octaves, but only two notes, and because the hymn melody has a trill at this point, that kind of disguises the fact that we're losing a little bit of the bass here. So here's another one. Inevitably, you're going to have to leave out some of the bass octaves here as well, and that's because of the trill in the hymn voice. Busoni starts out by leaving out the bottom notes, and then he switches to leaving out the top notes of the octaves. Because of that, this almost goes unnoticed that we're even losing anything in the bass at all. Here's another spot where Busoni manages to fit everything in by using a really brilliant fingering. He slides the thumb from A flat to G, so that leaves the right hand in position to play the 16th notes. So again, this is an idea, first of all, having your thumb on a black note and then also sliding it from a black note to a white note. According to the strict rules of fingering, this shouldn't be allowed, but actually, with a little help from the pedal, this really works. Here, the solution actually helps to bring out new musical ideas. In the original, the hymn tune and the ritornello collide on the same note, and on the organ, this is not a problem. On the piano, with only one keyboard, you need another solution. So Busoni's solution is perfect. The countermelody here starts an octave lower and then travels up the keyboard to its original octave seamlessly. And this is actually a really fascinating effect musically, as the countermelody is kind of echoing the rising line of the hymn tune. So I think it's really brilliant here when Busoni runs into a restriction, some kind of problem, and he actually turns it into a musical virtue. He actually creates more variety here in the sound. So as I was saying before, Busoni does notate all of the ornaments in large notes from Bach's original score, or almost all of them. And for the most part, I agree with his realizations. They're very sensible. I might consider playing these particular grace notes as short acciacchaturas. So very quick notes played almost at the same time as the larger note that they're slurred to, instead of as long appoggiaturas as Busoni realizes them. The other big change Busoni makes is he omits the repeat of the opening section. And the The repeat of the opening section is there because there are different words for the hymn tune for this music in the original. And Bach actually retained that repeat in the organ transcription, so you might consider keeping that. Evidently, Bach considered it to be part of the form, so that might fill out the form a little bit if you actually had that, and it would be pretty easy to work out how to do that. So I hope you enjoyed this close-up look at the transcriber's art. Please stay tuned. The complete performance is coming up. And also, please consider supporting the channel. You can do that easily at patreon.com/independent pianist. Also, if you want to book me for a house concert, you can drop me a line at cole@independentpianist.com. I'm always happy to give concerts. So if you want to see me live, that's always an option. And I also teach some students online so you can also drop me a line at cole@independentpianist.com if you want to have a consultation and talk about maybe studying with me. So I'll have more great music and conversation coming for you next week. So until then, stay tuned and keep practicing.